In Over His Head by OutOfPracticeYall. Summary: Dazai and Chuuya are assigned to work on a mission together. However, things go sideways when the boys start bickering before they've even been briefed. Things escalate and Chuuya is injured, resulting in them being taken off their original mission, and Mori assigning Dazai the new mission of looking after Chuuya. Before we begin, quick reminder that my podfics are available on both SoundCloud and Apple Podcast. Subscribe and give a listen there if you'd prefer either apps. Also, I'm happy to announce that the new request link is finally here. Check it out on the pinned post on Tumblr or the community tabs or down in the description. Now, back to the fanfic. Chapter 1. You'll be going on a very delicate mission this time, Chuuya. Koyo spoke as she exited the elevator. Chuuya followed behind her, having let her leave first, then quickly matching his pace to Koyo's, walking beside her. Delicate? He asked. You sure you want to send me on this mission? It astounded Koyo sometimes, the amount of self-doubt the subordinate managed to conjure up every time she ordered him to do something other than break stuff or bully their enemies. Of course, there were times where Chuuya's results were less than favorable, but it was a learning curve. On the whole, he was more than efficient. Yes, I specifically want you on this mission. Think of it as a test of everything you've learned under me. A chance to show you're more than just brawn. Show some diplomacy. She stole a glance at the boy, smiling when she saw the way his eyes lit up. Nothing motivated him better than a challenge. You won't be alone either, so if things go sideways, you can always consult your mission partner. Chuuya nodded as Koyo came to a halt in front of their destination. They were on the 4th floor of headquarters. There was nothing on this floor but a bunch of meeting rooms. Chuuya presumed it was for his mission briefing before he and whoever he was working with would be sent on their way. Koyo gripped the door handle, before pausing and placing a hand on Chuuya's shoulder, drawing his attention back to her. Remember, delicacy, diplomacy, she said firmly as she opened the door. The room was dark. Maybe they were the first ones here, he thought. He felt along the wall by the door for the light switch. When the lights flickered on, it revealed a high-ceiling meeting room, all red accent lights and no windows. At its center and taking up most of the space was a long black table, lined with tall back chairs. Shockingly enough, there sat a figure hunched over the table at the far end. Chuuya had to squint at first as his eyes adjusted. Then he took in the full black suit, the oversized coat hung on the chair, the black mess of hair framing his face, and those damn bandages. Him? He scoffed in disbelief at Koyo. She had her hand on her forehead, letting out a disappointed sigh. From the far end of the room he heard Dazai's glum voice. Well, my day is ruined. Chuuya spun on his heels, trying to swiftly duck past Koyo. Nope, this isn't gonna work out. You're gonna have to... Koyo's hand snatched the scruff of his jacket and shoved him back into the room. He almost toppled over completely from the force. For a second, Chuuya forgot himself and his rank. He almost cursed at her, but his words died before they ever left his lips, seeing her stern expression. I expect results. Someone will be around with your brief soon. Do not disappoint. He had no response. Chuuya just stood on the spot dumbly as she closed the door. It wasn't often Koyo scolded him, which only made it worse when she did. Ooh, someone's in trouble. Dazai sang from his seat, sitting up straighter and grinning, as if Chuuya's embarrassment was actually nourishing to him. Shut up. he grumbled, moving to the table and choosing the chair furthest away from Dazai. Why the hell were you just squatting in the dark anyway, like some sad excuse of a vampire? It was a fatal mistake to choose that chair, because Dazai noticed it. If he had taken the second chair in, or the middle, or just sat opposite Dazai like a normal person, Dazai might not have noticed. But the fact Chuuya specifically chose the chair that put as much space between them as he could, well, Dazai couldn't ignore that. Maybe I am a vampire, he responded, jumping up from his seat and pulling his coat around his shoulders. He grabbed the bottom corner of it and pulled the length of the coat across his face, mocking a vampire cape as he dramatically stalked towards Chuuya. Chuuya eyed him with suspicion that he was trying to mask as disinterest. Scared of vampire slug? Don't worry, I'd rather starve than choke down the bile from your veins. I wish you were a vampire. Chuuya rested his head on his fist and his elbows on the table as he watched Dazai. That way I could barbecue your reject Nosferatu ass in the sun and be done with you. Dazai stopped, his eyebrows raising in surprise. You've seen Nosferatu? Since joining the Mafia, Chuuya had seen a lot of movies, playing catch-up for all the years he hadn't been able to. There was a corner of his small apartment dedicated to the second-hand movies he's been compiling and making his way through. Not that he'd tell Dazai that. Instead, he just said, and? Nothing. Dazai shrugged and then grinned as he took up the seat next to Chuuya. He turned it, making sure it whined against the ground to face Chuuya, his long legs encroaching on Chuuya's space. Aren't movies like that a little old for toddlers like you? Chuuya's eyes flicked from Dazai's face to his knees and back again. His mouth twitched with irritation, making Dazai grin wider. The fact that he was trying to keep his lid on his temper only made Dazai all the more excited. We're the same damn age. Chuuya closed his eyes and exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Whatever, I'm not gonna take movie advice from someone who thought he's a vampire. Dazai leaned forward, once again closing the space between them. Oh, poor gullible Chuuya. He took advantage of Chuuya's closed eyes to condescendingly pat the ginger's hair. You actually believed that? Chuuya groaned and slapped his hand away. He stood up so he could leer over Dazai. What is your problem? Dazai did the same, taking a step closer so their faces were inches apart. I would have thought it was evident by now that you're my problem. Get out of my face! He stamped his foot forward, aiming for Dazai's and forcing the other boy to step back or end up with squished toes. He put a little of gravity behind it, even if it wouldn't have affected Dazai. The crack it left on the floor was satisfying enough. How scary, Dazai mocked. Koyo would be disappointed. That made Chuuya stiffen. He stood up straighter, his eyes briefly casting down to the crack in the floor, which now looked more like a mark of failure than triumph. I know, Dazai interrupted his thoughts. He lunged forward, his arms outstretched to capture Chuuya. We should hug it out. Except his arms closed over nothing, just wrapping around his own chest. He blinked at the empty space in front of him before looking around genuinely confused, until he heard snickering from above him and that confusion turned to annoyance as he looked up. There, directly above him stood Chuuya, who was using his gravity powers to stand on the ceiling. He'd seen him stick to walls before and leap off of just about every surface possible, but just standing there, upside down on the ceiling, not a single hair out of place? How could he not get irritated at the sight of that? It must have shown on his face because Chuuya grinned. Jealous? No, he answered stubbornly, because of course he was. Who didn't want to stand on the ceiling? It was perfectly ridiculous and completely unfair that Chuuya got to have set power. He walked off, intent on taking up his original seat again, when he noticed his footsteps were echoing. He paused, looking up again to find Chuuya still directly above him, innocently inspecting his fingernails. He started again, and so did Chuuya. He stopped, turned around, and so did Chuuya. Dazai threw his hands up in frustration, letting out an exaggerated groan. "You're such a child!" At this, Chuuya laughed, a real hands-holding his stomach laugh. All Dazai could do in response was grumble, because he didn't hate hearing that laugh. "Oh, poor flightless Dazai. Go cry about it in your diary." Dazai folded his arms, giving Chuuya a look of malice, trying to hide the heat that came to his face. "1, it's a journal, not a diary. 2, as if you'd make it into my diary." "As if I don't," Chuuya retorted. He was enjoying how the tables had turned on Dazai too much. So much so he was forgetting to pay attention to his ability. Loose strands of his hair started falling downwards, and his shirt was starting to ride up his torso. Walking the ceiling was something Koyo had suggested he started practicing, a way to sneak about that nobody else could. It wasn't perfect yet, which meant when he wasn't paying attention, more worryingly than just his hair and his clothes, his blood started rushing to his head. "You know what?" Dazai's voice sounded just a bit fainter in Chuuya's ears. "I will put this in the diary. Dearest diary, today Chuuya, that pint-sized shrimp, somehow managed to reach a new low. Though it had nothing to do with his disproportionately huge ego somehow getting bigger or his pathetic low-grade retorts having any effect, but because he got shorter. By a whole 2 inches. I'm sure of it, because he started wearing fancy heels to cover it up. He thinks nobody notices, but..." Dazai's rant was cut off by one set fancy heel hitting him square in the shoulder. He looked up to see Chuuya with now 1 shoe and 1 white sock, sticking his tongue out at him before grinning. "So you admit you have a diary. I hope you fall and crack your head open." Dazai picked up the shoe and threw it back at Chuuya. It bounced away from him a few inches before ever having hit him. "I never fall," Chuuya said smugly. Dazai simply rolled his eyes in response, eliciting to ignore the bragging that Chuuya was now doing about how he wasn't a klutz like Dazai. He started for his chair again, the echo of his steps now uneven due to Chuuya's missing shoe. That was until Chuuya stopped talking mid-sentence. He heard a whoosh of air and looked up again just in time to see Chuuya's unconscious body hurtling straight for him. He barely had the chance to react except to uselessly stick his arms out in an attempt to catch the other body as their bodies crashed together and Dazai went down too. There was a sickening crunch as they hit the floor, all tangled limbs. Chuuya let out a cry of pain before trying to curl in on himself, only to press into Dazai. Perhaps it was the shock, but Dazai didn't feel in pain. He sat up slowly, testing his limbs. His movements were almost mechanical as he checked off each intact joint. They seemed fine. Then he turned his attention to Chuuya, who was also sitting up, only much more shakily than Dazai did. He didn't realize why until Chuuya held up his arm, which now had a very obvious bend in the middle of his forearm. "Fuzz," Dazai mumbled to himself. He went to reach out to Chuuya, but the other boy shuffled backwards, nearly falling again as he did. His eyes flickered about and the lids twitched, like he couldn't focus. "I'm fine, I got this." Chuuya stared hard at his arm as his other hand came to cup it near the break, activating his powers, searching for the feeling of his bones within himself and pulling them together. There was another snapping sound and Chuuya grimaced in pain. It wasn't the first time Dazai had witnessed Chuuya do this. During their fight with Rimbod would have been the first, so the idea of Chuuya using his ability to set his bones wasn't foreign to Dazai. However, they'd been in the midst of a fight then. Dazai didn't really have time to consider it hurt Chuuya to do it, even if it seemed obvious seeing it now. He wasn't thinking straight. His own ability lost to him now. He just hated the way Chuuya's face was twisting in pain and the unsteady way he was still swaying. Again, he reached out to Chuuya, this time making contact instead of his touch being comforting. Chuuya cried out again and his gravity left him, falling against Dazai's chest. Hey, Dazai finally found his voice, even if it came unusually quiet. Hey, it's okay. He slipped one arm around Chuuya's back, the other coming to gently cradle the broken forearm to his own. Come on, stand up. Put your arm on my shoulder. With his senses coming back to him, he started to suspect Chuuya had hit his head. He seemed far too out of it. He didn't even protest doing as he was told, simply following Dazai's instructions. Come on, let's get you to the infirmary. Chuuya's balance was even worse on his feet. His knees kept giving out as Dazai walked him out the meeting room and down the hall. Now that he was moving, Dazai's own body made its pain known. His shoulder and jaw throbbed where Chuuya had slammed into him, and he was pretty sure he'd managed to roll his ankle during the fall. He clenched his teeth trying to ignore it, and concentrated on keeping Chuuya upright as they slowly made their way to the infirmary. Dazai didn't think this day could get worse. Not only had he been taken off the mission, but Mori had left his office himself specifically to scold him. Well, he said it was because he'd heard about the fall and wanted to check up on them personally, which he had. As soon as he'd come into the infirmary, Mori took over Chuuya's checkup. Mercifully for Chuuya, his arm had already been set and casted by that point. It was an ugly, bulky cast that started at the top of his forearm and ran all the way to his knuckles, with a hole cut out for his thumb to fit through, the upper part of which Elise had already covered with doodles. Why is it so hard for you to play nice, Despite Mori still hovering about the bed Chuuya was occupying, he looked directly at Dazai when he said this. The infirmary room was small and mimicked a doctor's office. It had one raised iron-framed bed that Chuuya and Elise were sitting on, a desk, a couple of cabinets containing supplies, and one office chair. Usually, the chair was reserved for the doctor who, depending on the day, may or may not have an actual license to practice. But Dazai currently sat in it, idly spinning himself around with his non-injured leg and sulking. Why is it automatically my fault? He whined. He is the idiot that was walking on the ceiling. Dazai gestured at Chuuya. He was goading him into arguing, because the boy had barely spoken since the fall. Chuuya didn't argue though. He slowly looked from Mori to Dazai with unfocused eyes, like he was hearing the conversation with a delay. It made Dazai's chest tighten. I hope you fall and crack your head open. God, why had he said that? Mori rolled his eyes and turned back to Chuuya. He held a finger up in front of the boy and asked him to follow it with his eyes. From the angle he was sitting at, Dazai couldn't see how well Chuuya followed the instruction. Judging from Mori's tutting, it wasn't well. There had definitely been a head injury. By the time Dazai had walked them to the infirmary, the hair on the back of Chuuya's head was matted with blood. You started it, Chuuya mumbled, entirely too late. Is that so? Mori said, looking back at Dazai with an expression that said he was not actually surprised. He removed the surgical gloves he'd been wearing, apparently finished with his examinations, and walked over to Dazai. When the boy didn't vacate his seat, Mori cleared his throat. Dazai stood with a groan. This wasn't fair. He was injured too. His ankle was sprained. The reason his jaw hurt so much was because he'd bitten his cheek in the fall. A whole teenager had crashed into him. He deserved at least some pity, didn't he? He moved to lean against the wall by one of the cabinets, whilst Mori perched in the chair. From what I've seen of the scans, it's a clean, if not severe break. He'll be in a cast for a while. Again, Mori directed his speech towards Dazai, as if Chuuya wasn't even there. And a lovely concussion to go with it, which means Mori nodded towards Dazai at the exact moment the penny dropped for him. He'll need someone to watch over him. Me? Dazai pointed at himself in shock. You can't be serious! Yes, you. Mori steepled his fingers and smiled. And before you argue, this is an order, Dazai. It's about time the pair of you learned to get along. He wanted to argue. Dazai could feel the urge physically bubbling up from his stomach and getting caught in his chest as he fought to keep his mouth closed. It wasn't like he knew the first thing about concussions. How was he supposed to even know if Chuuya's was getting worse or better? He didn't even care if it did get worse. It wasn't his responsibility to look after Chuuya like some nursemaid. In the midst of these thoughts, Dazai happened to glance Chuuya's way again, to the lost-looking boy in a cast who still occasionally wobbled where he sat as he tried to follow Elise's explanations of the characters she'd drawn along his cast. God, who else did he have but Dazai? Well, Dazai? Mori asked, almost as if he'd been reading his mind and smiling like he knew he'd already won. Dazai loathed the way he'd do that. Logically, Mori could not read his mind. Dazai knew that, but he could read Dazai well enough for it to feel just as intrusive as if he could. He threw up his hands in defeat, heaving a sigh. Fine, I'll look after the brat. Very good. Mori stood from his seat. He clasped his hands behind his back, looking rather pleased with himself. Consider I'm doing you a favor here, Dazai. I could have ordered you to tell Koyo you broke her subordinate. Would you rather have that job? His stomach twisted at the thought. Dealing with Chuuya was going to be a pain, but he'd take that over Koyo's wrath any day. No? Exactly. I'll leave you two to make your arrangements then. As he spoke, Elise hopped down from her place on the bed and skipped to the door. Mori trailed behind her, and Dazai could have sworn the man was also practically skipping. The bastard was enjoying his misery, and he wasn't even trying to hide it. Alone with him, Dazai's attention turned to Chuuya again, who was now looking at him with the faintest hints of annoyance on his features. Well, he thought pessimistically, it can only go downhill from here. I Never Fall proceeds to fall. This is one of the fics I hold dear to my heart since it had been uploaded in 2024, when I was still active in the fandom. I got a wave of nostalgia reading this first chapter, and hella fun. One of my favorite things about Darcy's writing is how they managed to make the characters hilarious without making them out of character. Their teen SKK is a treat to read every single time. I truly miss our discussions on Tumblr about these silly idiots. Hope you get the chance soon. BSD Season 6, I'm praying for thee. Thank you so much, Darcy, for giving me permission to podfic your lovely work. I hope you enjoyed listening to this chapter and will enjoy the upcoming ones. And thank you, dear listeners, for watching. Don't forget to send kudos to the author through the link in the description. Also, if you'd like to request any fics, make sure to click the tally link below. And if you'd like to show more support or check out the monthly schedule, click the link through Ko-fi. Hope you have a great week. Till next time.